Sierra Leone, Dr. Julius Adabio, and I'm honored and privileged to invite him to make his welcome statement.
Let's sit down, please. The Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation, representative of the political affairs, peace and security of the African Union Commission, the Chief Minister and Ministers of Government, honorable members of Parliament present here today, Chef de Cabinet, Office of the President of the UN General Assembly, seated permanent representatives in Addis Ababa and New York, members of the diplomatic and consular corps present in Sierra Leone, resident in Sierra Leone, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I'm delighted to warmly welcome all of you to Freetown, the capital of the Republic of Sierra Leone, your home for the next few days as we convene for this important retreat of the permanent representatives of the African Union Committee of 10 on the reform of the United Nations Security Council, commonly called C10. I wish to express on behalf of the government and people of Sierra Leone my sincere gratitude to each and every one of you for honoring our collective responsibility to advance Africa's interest on the global stage. This retreat is not merely an administrative gathering. It is a profound moment of reflection, of unity, and of renewed commitment to a cause that is not only African, but also global: the reform of the United Nations Security Council. But truly, this reform of the Security Council is also about justice for Africa at all levels. So ladies and gentlemen, this meeting today is part of an ongoing implementation of the Oyala Plan of Action, which was endorsed by the 37th Ordinary Summit for the African Union in February 2024, following the consultative summit of C10 heads of state and government held in Oyala, Equatorial Guinea in November 2023. That summit in Oyala was a turning point. It reaffirmed our shared resolve to move from rhetoric to action, to pursue with clarity and purpose the full realization of the common African position on the UN Security Council reform as articulated in the Ezowini Consensus and SAT Declaration. Since then, we have not looked back. Over the past year, we have translated that resolve into concrete actions and high-level engagements, achieving several notable milestones. Under Sierra Leone's presidency of the United Nations Security Council in August 2024, we convened a historic high-level debate on addressing historic injustice and enhancing Africa's effective representation in the Security Council. This was the first time the Council itself squarely addressed the question of structural reform and Africa's exclusion. The debate galvanized awareness about the urgency of correcting the historical injustice against Africa In less than a month after the historic debate, the United States modified its position, announcing its support for 2 permanencies for Africa, albeit without veto. In September 2024, on the margins of the 79th session of the UN's General Assembly, the C10 again held a high-level ministerial meeting with the 5 permanent members of the Security Council. That frank and direct engagement provided a critical platform to reinforce our position that Africa's case in this reform is unique and urgent. We made it clear to our P5 counterparts that Africa must be treated as a special case, given the magnitude of its historical underrepresentation. At the UN Summit of the Future in September 2024, world leaders adopted the landmark Pact for the Future. For the first time ever, a consensus document of all UN member states explicitly acknowledged the need to redress the historical injustice done to Africa with regard to Security Council representation. This was a milestone in our journey, an encouraging sign that the international community recognizes Africa's rightful demand for representation. These developments signal that we stand at a defining moment in our pursuit of global equity. The world has indeed begun to listen and to acknowledge Africa's legitimate stake and the future of the Security Council. But acknowledgement, no matter how welcome, is not enough. We must be clear-eyed. It must lead to tangible action. The commitment and declarations we have garnered from the halls of the United Nations to the chambers of the African Union now present a rare and timely opportunity to translate words into actions. In essence, the next phase of this historic journey must be about implementation and results 20 years after the adoption of both the Ezowini Consensus and SAT Declaration. Therefore, even as we welcome the growing support, the fundamental facts that drive our cause remain unchanged and undeniable. Africa, despite being the 3rd largest continent by population and accounting for more than a quarter of the United Nations member states, remains the most underrepresented region in the Security Council. This is not merely a political oversight, it is a profound historical injustice that continues to undermine the principles of equitable geographical representation as enshrined in the UN Charter. We are therefore asking for not for special favors, but for rectification of a glaring imbalance. The scale and uniqueness of this injustice make Africa a special case that must be addressed as a matter of priority and urgency in any credible reform of the Council. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, this retreat is therefore of critical importance as we gather here in Freetown as C10 permanent representatives from Addis Ababa and New York. The objective is to consolidate, harmonize, and energize our collective efforts for the decisive stage ahead. We must emerge from these 2 days of deliberation with a clear plan of action and renewed consensus on the way forward. In particular, the task is to develop 3 documents that will sharpen our diplomatic toolkits and reinforce the common African position. Namely, an African Union model for a reformed Security Council capturing our vision of an enlarged council with Africa as a rightful representation. A strategic roadmap, which is the next, detailing activities and engagements to advance the common African position in all fora, ensuring that our advocacy is sustained and coordinated. And finally, a detailed aid memoir to guide our diplomatic outreach, a reference document that will succinctly present our case and the rationale for the common African position to be used in our engagements. By the end of this retreat, ladies and gentlemen, these articles, our model, roadmap, aid memoir, should equip the CTEN to approach the coming phase with greater coherence and persuasiveness. Just as importantly, this gathering should strengthen our unity of purpose at all levels, so that as we leave Freetown, we do so speaking with one voice, louder and clearer than ever before. CTEN ambassadors, allow me to highlight 5 key imperatives that should guide your deliberations and actions moving forward. First, as fora, particularly during intergovernmental moral key stakeholders, but how a reformed council benefits the entire international system. In every forum, you must be articulate and persuasive. Reform is long overdue, and that Africa's inclusion will enhance the Council's legacy more than it deserves. We are simply asking for what any continent with our population and contribution, as already alluded to by many speakers, stake in a global peace and security is due. In line with the Leone consensus in that declaration, we demand 2 permanent seats on the Reformed Council with all the rights and privileges of current permanent members, including the right veto if it continues to exist, and at least 5 non-permanent seats for Africa. This is nothing more than what my colleagues, heads of state and government, my colleagues, heads of state and government. Ladies and gentlemen, as the CTEP presses the case for reform, we must also situate it within the broader context of challenges and the quest for a more effective United Nations. The world is facing unprecedented challenges, including but not limited to climate change and climate insecurity, pandemics, persistent geopolitical instability, and rapid technological disruptions. These 21st century challenges demand collective solutions and a Security Council that is more inclusive, more representative of contemporary realities, and not the geopolitical map of 1945. A council stuck in the paradigms of the last century cannot adequately address the crisis of this century. That is where we are. Africa's role in international peace and security is today far more persuasive, is far more passive. Our nations are contributors to UN peacekeeping operations. We are often
reform of the UN Security Council. Please. We are moving on to a family photo with His Excellency the President, who has graciously consented to do that. Immediately after the National Anthem of Sierra Leone and the AU, members of the high table will join us. You're kindly requested to make your way to the forecourt of the building, where His Excellency the President will join for 3 separate photo opportunities. The first will be with His Excellency and members of the high table, plus the Chief Minister. The second will be His Excellency and permanent representatives of the Foreign Minister. And the final one will be with His Excellency, experts, and the Foreign Minister. So if we can just stand up now for the national anthem.